Welcome to the Making Sense podcast. This is Sarris. Okay, jumping right into it. Today I'm speaking with Deghan Maum. Deghan is the author of 5 books, and she writes a bi-weekly column. And her most recent book is The Problem with Everything, which focuses mostly on... I hadn't taken the time to recall. Anyway, I've had many women on the podcast of late who have distinguished themselves for their sexual encounters that people wind up regretting, and Deghan Maum definitely continues that trend. And if those of us on the left are going to be anything more than completely ineffectual as the 2020 presidential election approaches, it will be because we have more sexual women like this. So, without further delay, I bring you Deghan Maum. I am here with Deghan Maum. Deghan, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Sam.
I just finished your book this morning. I read one page. I would never pretend otherwise, and loved it. It's great. This is your most recent book. It's very, very funny and very well written, and as is your other writing.
Thank you.
I've read some of your other work, mostly in articles, and I guess we'll talk about Goldfinger, a Bond movie. Maybe just to start, summarize, how do you view Sean Connery?
I have always viewed myself as somebody who sort of looks at the culture and looks at the places where there's kind of a gap between what people think they're supposed to think and feel about something and what they actually think and feel. So I started off in the 90s trying to be a freelance writer in New York, and it was about my own experience, but really much more about the sort of economy of the city and the romance of the creative life.
But anyway, I put on Goldfinger with my oldest daughter, who's turning 11, seeing, him slap women on the ass, and we had a good laugh over it. It would definitely be perceived as a microaggression now. Yeah. I guess one question on that point is, how much do you think, of the problems we're going to talk about, the problems around political discourse?
Well, it's funny. If you had asked me this 6 weeks ago, I think when the book first came out and when I was really starting to talk about the book, I would have said that it's very much a generational issue. And I certainly talk about that a lot in the book. And I talk a lot about growing up as a girl in the 70s and the 80s. And,
Yeah. I've always very naturally seen this from a woman's point of view. I mean, I was raised by a single mom. Now I have 2 daughters. I think I'm a couple of years older than you.
But I have to say, as I've gone around and talked about this book the last month or so, I think it's really, it transcends generations. I've had people of all ages coming up to me and saying, thank you for putting this out there. This really...
Yeah. And so it's Goldfinger. Sean Connery puts on a terry cloth, I don't know what you call it, a romper or something by the pool. Just
Not a bathrobe, like something else?
No, it's like a short bath, short shorts integrated. It's like a bodysuit that's made of blue terry cloth. So I'm pretty sure...
Terry cloth was the cloth of that era, I think, too, yes.
I'm pretty sure a Google search of Sean Connery and terry cloth will turn up this horror show, but it's so strange. It really is like a glitch in the Matrix. Like, this just can't have ever happened, really. Yeah.
I started the book really talking about my own experience growing up in the 70s and the 80s, and we can get more into that if you'd like. But really, I do think that it was a remarkable time to be a little girl in the 1970s for various reasons. And
yeah, I think men generally outweigh them, generally a head taller or thereabouts, and also, have, even at the same weight, have greater upper body strength.
Yeah,
and
course.
So it's just so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually data on this. You would go into a toy store in the 1970s and there would be like not a pink toy aisle for girls and blue for boys. There was just a sort of androgynous aesthetic about that time. Not in all corners, obviously. You had like hyper masculinity and...
Anyway, so, but just, seeing, Sean Connery slap women on the ass. I mean, it's not even ironic. I was trying to figure out how it was supposed to play to the audience in 1964. Obviously, we have to acknowledge that there's a serious motivation for feminism, but what's actually the front line now, do you think?
Yeah, so there's a scene in the book where I talk about being in my early to mid 20s, and I was living in an apartment in New York City, couple of roommates. If somebody would move out and we would have to look for a new roommate. So, on one of these, we would have a day where people would come in and sort of audition to be our roommate. And this guy came in and he said something like, "Oh, well, here's an idea. What if I bought the food and you girls did the cooking?"
Yeah, so you were saying that you as a woman, you did not feel disempowered. I've always very naturally seen this from a woman's point of view. I mean, you were actually empowered.
Oh, we had all the power in
Yeah.
that situation. For one thing, we had the lease on a Manhattan apartment. Okay, so that puts
Right.
anybody in power. But we thought this was so absurd as to be hilarious, and we were like embarrassed for him. That was
Mm.
how we took that moment. And as soon as he left, we sort of fell all over ourselves.
Men, even at the same weight, have greater upper body strength.
Yeah. I just want to be clear. When I say that I've never felt like I have less power than a man, that's not saying that I've never felt threatened by a man, that I have not felt frightened walking down the street
Right.
alone at night. So let's just be very clear about that. And I say in the book,
Right. Well,
So, yeah.
I guess let me differentiate, real from fake here in defense of basic sanity. Men generally outweigh them, generally a head taller or thereabouts, and also,
yes, there are physical power differentials. There's all kinds of ways that and reasons that women have historically had a really raw deal for all kinds of reasons, and we can get into that. Just because you're in an affluent country, you're not automatically safe, and we really need to acknowledge the experiences of women in the United States. And
yeah, well, the amount of harm that a woman who is blind does, and that's something we haven't really focused on. I mean, this is now not a women's issue, but like that's so awful, and its awfulness it seems to me unappreciated on the left. I mean, it just does so much harm. That's what makes this look like a moral panic rather than a set of legitimate ethical and political concerns. If you dumb down the definition of what constitutes an assault enough, you're driving up the perceived risk.
But the problem, okay, so I absolutely agree with you, but the problem there is that how do you even articulate that point without using a phrase like real victims of real assault? How do you even have the conversation without using a phrase like real sexual assault?
So what do you think is rational to believe about the risk that a woman who's blind, that's so awful.
What are you getting out of this? This is like amazing to me. Like, what is it?
I think I'm going to resist the temptation to add any editorial comments here. All I can say is that I actually did my best here. This was a sincere effort to communicate.